Stim We're here for Stimulants 101. And last week we did Opioids 101. So you don't need to go to one to be at the other, but you might want to watch the recorded version of the other one. So we are very excited to have all of you here with us. We know you're going to get a lot out of this. And with that, I want to introduce Tanagra, who we're so excited about having with us to speak on this topic and share her expertise with all of us. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. It's so nice to be with you all this morning. And today we'll be covering Stimulants 101 for the next 2 hours. I'm very excited to be in this learning community and to have the opportunity to share your knowledge and expertise and have it shared with each other. I am part of the National Harm Reduction Coalition. I am the learning and engagement strategist, and my work is through the capacity building and learning and engagement team. As you probably know, and if you don't know, I'll let you know now, National Harm Reduction Coalition has been around or in existence for near 30 years. It was National Harm Reduction Coalition actually was founded here in California, in the East Bay, in Oakland, by a group of folks that identified as people who use drugs that were being impacted by the HIV pandemic at the time, and were being left out of the conversations that were being had around how to best approach or navigate that pandemic. And although they were dying, their loved ones were dying, they were being, they were being harmed by this pandemic. They were not being invited to the tables where these discussions were happening. And so what they decided to do was to self-organize and to advocate for themselves and for their community. And out of that came the National Harm Reduction Coalition. And still to this day, we continue to work towards creating spaces for dialogue and action that can help heal the harms caused by racialized drug policies. And we do that through policy and advocacy, through trainings and technical assistance, through our overdose prevention work, which is really robust, as well as resources and publications. If you are interested in any materials, I invite you to peruse our website. And if you're looking for something and you can't find it, you can always email me. You'll have my email at the end of the training, and I'm happy to either figure out where it's located or connect you to someone that does, and they can send it to you. In terms of some Zoom, since we've been in this virtual world for the past almost 2 years, I would like for folks to, if you haven't done so, add your name and your pronouns in your little Zoom box. We also want to make sure we're going into breakout groups. So if you're joining us from 2 different devices, if you can add your name to that device, it will be helpful for matters in terms of making sure that we're putting you in the right, both of your devices into the right breakout group. So we don't have your phone somewhere and your computer somewhere else. We love to hear you speak. I enjoy having conversations with folks and having folks share their knowledge, share what they have experienced. And so we encourage you to use your microphone. If you want to ask a question, if you want to share, if you want to comment. And we also ask you that if you're not using your microphone, that you keep muted so that we can avoid ambient noises or minimize them as much as we can. We also invite you, if you can and you don't have any accessibility needs, to turn on your camera. It's nice to see folks' faces. It's really hard to do this work remotely. We really want to be able to hopefully be in person soon so we can feel each other's energy. And so if you are able to turn on your camera, we encourage you to do that as well, and certainly encourage you to do it when you go into breakout groups so that your colleagues can see you there. Use the emojis if you feel like it. We love to see those emojis showing up. And finally, technological issues may happen, and if they do, we just need to just roll with them. We'll make sure that we address them the best way we can. So today we are covering stimulants, and we will go into a discussion about what are stimulants, like a broader conversation. Then we will be going into specific types of stimulants. We'll discuss methamphetamine, ADHD medications, crack and cocaine, and then we'll go into specific harm reduction strategies that we can use if we would like to support or we work with folks that have identified that that's their drug of choice. How can we best engage them and support them from where we're at? And finally, we'll have a closing activity. I think we have some polls. I love a good poll, so I'm excited to see those. And those will be towards the end of the training. I also want to share with you a glossary. We'll be using some of these terms throughout the space today. As you know, language is really powerful, right? Language creates our worldview. It really impacts the way that we connect to each other, the way that we connect to the world, how we see it. And language shifts and changes, right? As we shift and change and the world transforms. And so when I started this work in the 90s, now you know how old I am, I started it and we spoke about harm reduction in terms of needle exchange, right? That's the services. So syringe access programs or syringe services programs were needle exchanges at the time. And then as we have progressed and shifted, now our language is different because it captures better what we do. And when I speak of all the programs that we offer, I think about them as harm reduction. Harm reduction includes folks that use drugs intravenously. It includes drugs that smoke or that snort the drugs, right? And so for me, when I think of harm reduction services, I think of all the things that we do that are beyond providing folks equipment to keep them safe, which is really important, right? But there's all these other pieces around connection, about community building, about really recognizing people's humanity that are part of the work that we do. So we think about people and we think about people first. And so we use person first language to really recognize that folks are not their behaviors, that folks are more complex than their behaviors, and that what they do doesn't necessarily make them who they are. And so we will use people who inject drugs or people who use drugs. We will be speaking around syringe access, syringe service programs. I can use harm reduction programs interchangeably with that. And when we use intravenous drug use or injection drug use, we'll be using it in the context of the verb. It's what the person does, but it's not who they are. So I just wanted to share that glossary with you all, just so that we're able to know where we're coming from in terms of the language. And then I wanted to share some group agreements for this learning community today. I want to ask folks if there's anything on this slide that you're seeing for the first time that you would want us to discuss or clarify further. So any group agreement that is new to you that you would like us to have a moment to discuss. And you can use your microphone or you can message me. No, you can message us in the meeting and then everyone can see it. I'll give folks a minute.
I'll send it to you. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
You need it or no? The training, the link? Yeah.
Are you all comfortable with this group agreements? Are they all familiar to you? Want to make sure that we're on the same page.
Hi, this is Kevin Sitter, and I'm wondering about the confidentiality for some of us who might use personal story.
Yes, take names, but not IDs, right? We want to make sure that we are making sure that we're creating a space where folks feel that they can share their experience, their expertise, without necessarily feeling that once we leave it here, like we say it here, it doesn't stay here. So I'm hearing that it's important for us to commit to making sure that what is said here stays here, right? And that we trust each other to hold that space for self, so we can share what we know and we can learn from each other. And so I appreciate that. I think confidentiality is important. I would say Las Vegas rule. What happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. So hopefully, I mean, it's too bad that we're not in Las Vegas, right? But we're here and it's awesome. And we will certainly be making sure that we commit to that. So thank you for bringing it up. Thank you. Anything else that folks need or would like for us to discuss?
Could you explain what the weight/ELMO means?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we harm reductionists, we love a good acronym. So weight is why am I talking? And it means that the same with ELMO, which is everybody, let's move on. And sometimes I know that I get really excited and I want to ask questions or I want to stay in a topic. And sometimes it feels like we're not going to come to resolution around that topic, or that we've discussed it to a point where there's nothing else much more that we can say. And so we commit ourselves to moving on, right? Commit ourselves to staying in a place of like, this is where we got to. And then, we're going to continue to move on through the training, and we can always come back to it later. So wait and Elmo. Why am I talking? And everybody, let's move on. Does that make sense, Miranda? Yeah, got it. Anything else that folks need? Okay. Awesome. So if folks feel okay with these agreements, I would encourage you to use your emojis or your thumbs up emoji to make sure that we're all on the same page, and then we're going to move on. We're going to Elmo out of this piece. Awesome. So I want to ask folks, why do people use drugs? In your experience, from what you know, why do we use drugs? Thank you. I see Sarai saying to cope with stress. Jenna is mentioning that to escape. I see to escape a couple of times there. For pain, Evelyn, yes. Yes, escaping because it feels good, or to self-medicate. Yes, Lori's absolutely. Leslie is echoing that too. That feels good. It makes us feel good. For some of us, it's about escaping reality. For some of us, it's to enhance sex. Absolutely, Kevin, yes. It gives us a break from reality. I appreciate that, Ashley. To fit in, yes, absolutely. To fit in, to numb, to experiment, Arcely, yes, absolutely. To experiment, to feel good, to not feel, to escape, or to be present, to experiment. It's something that we may have learned or may have seen. So it's something that feels normal to us. It's part of our routine. For some of us, we use drugs sometimes because we're bored and it gives us something to do or gives us a sense and a meaning. For some others, we use drugs because we're pressured, or we feel we have to use them because it is a way for us to be in community, right? It is a way for us to connect to others. And so sometimes substance use, it is about building connections too, right? And relationships to self and to others. So sometimes using drugs helps us understand ourselves better, right? And figure out what's going on with us. And sometimes we use drugs because we don't want to hear what's going on with us and we just want to put it aside. Absolutely. Any other reasons why we use drugs that you think you want to add? To manage trauma. Yes, Loris, absolutely. So we use drugs to manage trauma, and Arcely is saying or letting us know that we can become dependent, right? So using substances is what makes us feel normal, or what we understand as normal, right? So we don't necessarily see ourselves not using them, right? So for some of us, it's defiance. Kevin, can I ask you to tell me a little bit more about that if you can? I'd love to hear more.
I have some nephews and nieces who I think their drug use was in part to sort of go against their parents. Yeah, so I mean, it could be as simple as pot, but I think at times some people are using drugs to counter their establishment. Absolutely.
It's a way to, I think, to have ownership of self, right? It's about bodily autonomy. It is about defying systems and structures, right? And pushing against those. So I appreciate you naming that. And Ashley's sharing that it's not knowing how to stop or to quit. Absolutely. We use drugs sometimes because we don't know, or we don't want to, or we don't think we have the tools that we may need to be able to do that, right? So people use drugs also because they don't think that they need to stop using, right? We don't need to quit. So absolutely, all of those are really good reasons. And I want to pronounce your name correctly, and I am going to try. Nadia.
Yes, Nadia Juma.
Nadia Juma, yes, thank you. Can you tell me more about, what you're sharing in the chat box? I think it's really important. Would you mind?
Well, yes, I have family from Afghanistan, and they, in Afghanistan, they have opium where everybody smokes opium openly.
Yes.
So you grow up with it around you and it's considered natural. It's considered okay. It's part of your culture.
Yes, absolutely. And we use it because it's part of our culture. Some of us may use it also because it's part of our spiritual community, right? And so I appreciate you sharing that and knowing that it's not stigmatized in that context, right? Because it is part of who we are and the way that we move through the world with others, right? It's accepted in our culture. Thank you. Thank you for that, Nadia. So I want to ask you now, we talked about why we use. So I want us to think now, why don't we just stop using drugs? Why is it that we just don't stop it? What are some of the reasons behind that? And you can use the chat box and you can also use your microphone. Sarai is sharing dependency. Matthew, absolutely. Matthew, can I ask you to tell me a little bit more about your comment? I would like to hear more about it, if you have a microphone available. Matthew was sharing that it can kill you to stop using. Loris is sharing mental or physical dependence. Some folks just don't want to stop. To prevent withdrawal, Jamie, absolutely. And that's connected to not wanting to feel sick or be in pain. Kevin is sharing that we don't stop because it feels like we would be isolated or we would lose the connection to those that we're using with. Absolutely. We cannot stop because we have become dependent on the substance and it makes us sick to stop. There's a fear of the unknown. I appreciate you sharing that, Angelique. What would be like without substances, right? For many of us, substance use, one of the things that it does, besides all the things that we named before, it's also that it gives our life structure, right? Like I know how I feel when I'm using substances. I know what this does for me. I know how it impacts me. And I also know what it helps me do, right? And so if I'm being asked to stop, but I am not being able to find the resources or other things that can help me address those needs or meet those needs, right? Or they're unknown to me, it may make it really hard for me to want to stop, right? Because I may not necessarily want to explore or go into a place where I don't have control, right? So substance use also gives us a sense of control, right? Over our life and our bodies. And so many folks may not want to stop because of that. And Matthew is sharing that the body's so used to the drug being in the system that removing it without, support can cause all sorts of medical problems. Absolutely. I think that's a really good point, Matthew. And another point is that sometimes substance use or drug use can help mask pre-existing conditions that we have. So if I live with pain, right, I have back pain or I have pain, I don't know, I have dental work that I need to have done, and I'm using substances to help me cope with that, not having the substance bring back the pain, but also if I don't have a way to deal with my back pain or the pain that I have in other parts of my body, then I will be really reluctant to stop using, right? Because those pains may come up without the substance in a way that they didn't before. And Genesis, yeah, sobriety is scary, it's too raw. I may not know how to be or how it feels to be sober, right? Like I don't know how that experience is like at this point, and so I may not want to explore it. Or I may be weary of exploring it, right? So if you think about it, if we're thinking about the reasons we use and the reasons we don't stop using, they're very similar, right? And harm reduction is the space where we can have those conversations with folks to be able to help us understand better why is it that we use drugs. People will have different reasons for using drugs, as you mentioned. Each person may have 50 different reasons, right? And what is important for us as providers is to engage folks in conversation that can help us unpack not only why they use drugs, but what are some of the factors that are surrounding those behaviors or the substance use that we'll be using, that we can use when we're brainstorming with folks options to reduce risk for disease or fatal episodes, right? So I'm thinking about if I am using substances to stay awake because I'm unhoused, right? That's a really good space for conversation around, what are some of the things that would be helpful for that person in the moment? What would they need from us in terms of assessing risk and potential harm of that person stopping to use if they're not feeling safe because they're unhoused and they don't have a place to be housed at the moment, right? So maybe staying awake at night as a female identified person, for me would be really would be way more healthier and safer than not being awake and being in fear of being attacked or something happening to me, right? And so thinking about those things is really important because it gives us more data, more information, right? And also it allows us to follow the lead of the participant, which is ultimately what we want to do. So harm reduction is an approach, right? Harm reduction is a philosophy too, and it's a social movement. But when we think of harm reduction as an approach, what it tells us is you have so many opportunities, so many strategies that you can use or you can share with people to support them in reducing the negative consequences that can come from drug use or sex work or other behaviors, right? And so we can offer folks safer techniques. And when we think of safer techniques, for example, is using new sterile equipment every time, if they're able to. Safer techniques may mean to teach people how to share equipment if they don't have equipment available in a way that is safest for them, right? So that's a safer technique. In some parts of this country, harm reduction services are really completely unavailable, and people sometimes they're forced to share, right? So we want to have conversations with people about how is it that you are able to share in a way that is safe for you and for others. Condom use is a safer technique also. And then we have managed use. And that is a space we have to have conversations with folks about their substance use and how they perceive it in this moment. And if they're how are they feeling about it, right? Many people use substances and manage their substance use in a way that it doesn't interfere or impact their day-to-day life, right? And so many times folks will come and say, you know what, like I want to go back to using X amount because this is what felt to me manageable, right? And so we engage people in that conversation and we work with them to think through what are the options that they have, what may be some of the barriers that they're experiencing, and what are the things that we can provide in terms of support. And then there's abstinence, which is part of the harm reduction continuum. We believe in abstinence if that is something that the person is choosing for themselves. What we don't believe is with any of these things is imposing things on people, because we know that imposition, it's not necessarily, doesn't really work. And if it doesn't come from you, it's harder to maintain. Change is hard enough as it is. It's hard enough if I want it. So imagine if it's imposed, right? It doesn't feel sustainable because it's not coming from a place where I feel that I can connect to it and I can walk the road to get to it and stay there, right? And so what we want to do is understand that harm reduction is sobriety or abstinence is not the ultimate goal of harm reduction. The goal of harm reduction is to create a space where people can come to us and have conversations about things that they do that are highly stigmatized and highly shamed. And because of that stigma, that silence, and that shame, it becomes more dangerous for people. And we want to create a space of safety and security where we recognize people's humanity and we're able to have a conversation with them about what it is that they want in this moment and what they feel that they can do in this moment, right? And people we all change, right? And our minds change. And at some other point, someone may tell you, you know what, I'm willing to explore sobriety or abstinence. And some other folks will tell you that is not in my book. I am not interested in it. And that's still harm reduction, right? Both of those options are harm reduction and many others that are not on the table right now. And so when we think of harm reduction as an approach, it's creating that space for conversation, creating that space of safety, of connection with people. It is also movement. Harm reduction is a movement that recognizes that public health is social justice, that racism, stigma, and criminalization are the real root causes of harm for people. And we can add their misogyny, trans and homophobia, right? We can add their capitalism, dare I say it. All of those things are the things that create xenophobia, right? All those things, all those systems are the real reasons, the roots of harm. And that our work, it's to connect with people and to have these conversations, because ending inequality and oppression means that we're fostering health and liberation, right? So as much as I see people as human beings that have the ability and the right to engage in bodily autonomy, to make choices for themselves, the more that I am countering inequality and oppression as a collective, as an individuals too. And finally, thinking that or centering the voices of those most impacted, the leadership of people that use drugs, the leadership of people engaged in sex work, the leadership of people most impacted by the systems is important. It is invaluable. It is necessary, and is us following that leadership what lead us to transformative change. And so thinking about harm reduction as a movement is really important too, not to lose the spirit and the where it came from, right? Because it started as a movement. And so today, in terms of drugs, we will be talking about stimulants, and we'll be having a conversation, as I said, about amphetamines, cocaine, methamphetamine, and crack. And so I would love to hear from you in your conversations with your participants, if they've shared this. What are some of the most commonly used stimulants that you've heard folks mention or share with you that they use? And what would be some of the examples of harm reduction messaging that you would use when you're engaging someone in a conversation around their stimulant use? So what are the things that they use? And what are some good harm reduction messages that you have shared with people when they tell you, I'm using X stimulant? And you can use your microphone, or you can type it in the chat box, whichever you prefer. Yes. These are some. Can you see it, Natalie? Yeah. Well, we're talking about, I'll type them here. We're going to talk about cocaine, crack, meth. So I see meth. Okay, what else? Let me see. I see meth. So Katie and Melissa are both sharing that the stimulant most commonly used in terms of their experience with their participant is meth. I see cocaine and meth. Thank you, Jenna. Meth. Okay, we'll see. Give folks one more chip. Ritalin. Okay, so you use some of the ADHD medications. Okay, so what would be some of the harm reduction messages that we could use when we're talking to folks about their meth use or their crack use or their ADHD medication use? Yes, Kevin, tell me more. What is some of the animosity that you see? I think that comes from stigma, right?
It is, I think, stigma, and then I'm not sure if there's some racism. I remember being in a head shop, and there were two people buying some pipes, one bubble and one for crack, and they got into a fight. It's just like, it just seemed to be something that was judgmental about each community.
Yes. Yes, because if we think about crack, we associate crack use mostly with Black and brown folks, and meth mostly with white working poor folks, right? And so when we think about that, the root of it is capitalism, right? It needs us to keep fighting each other so that we are all being exploited. So I appreciate that Greg is also sharing classism. I think there's an issue of racism and classism there that is very clear, and that we internalize that stigma. I remember being in the drop-in center that I used to work at in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and I would hear these conversations with participants all the time, what they would say to each other, well, at least I'm not nodding off, like I don't use heroin and then dope, and then the other folks would be like, well, at least I'm not smoking crack. And so it would be, and I'm like, yo guys, we're all drug users here. You know what I mean? But it was fascinating to me how we internalize these messages and how it shows up in our interactions, right? And in our conversations. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. Loris is sharing, blame it on the war on drugs for that, keeping negative media on people who use crack and related cocaine to the Wall Street and blue collar folks. Absolutely. That movie that Charlie Sheen and Charlie Sheen and Gordon Gekko, Michael Douglas, which was Wall Street, right? Like that movie in the 80s about the use of cocaine in the 80s is a really good example of that. Tobacco can be considered a stimulant, yes. Nadia. So for some of us, smoking cigarettes. Oh yes, some folks, there's stigma associated around meth use also in terms of homophobia, thinking that only gay folks use meth, right? And so yes, there's all these different levels, right? When we see in terms of substance use. So when we're thinking about messages, harm reduction messages that we can use related to this class of drugs. For example, stimulants operate in the body differently than opioids, right? And so when we think of a stimulant, what does a stimulant do? We're going to get into that in a second, but what does it do when we're using it? What we would use a stimulant for? Coffee, tobacco, meth, crack. Yes, Angelique, it provides us with energy, right? It alters and it wakes us up. Yes, Natalie, absolutely. It excites you and alerts us, right? So we are in a state of alertness, of heightened senses, right? It activates our nervous system, all of these things that you're saying, right? And so if I am using, yes, it alerts that flight or fight mode. Yes, absolutely. So it alerts us, it puts us in a different space as people than other substances, right? So if I am engaging with someone around their substance use related to stimulants, I would tell people what are some of the good things that we could tell someone that it's alert and may not sleep for 24 hours and may not eat, right? What would be some of the things that we could say to them to help them minimize some of the harms, right? Yes, a lot of use can bring a state of paranoia, particularly if that is associated or connected also to behavioral mental health stuff. Absolutely. And even without that, it can happen. Yes. So it can impact our mental and emotional health. What else? So use less, right? If it increases our heart rate, right? It's important that we are able to share with people some of the messages, right? In terms of minimizing potential harms, right? So drink water, right? Eat food if they can, right? Another thing that we can tell folks is to space their use, right? So that they can come back to their body and they don't overramp, which is an overdose on stimulants. We're going to talk about that in a second. Right. So now, like we talked about this last week, but yes, caffeine is a stimulant. Absolutely. Yes. Kevin, I really appreciate that. Tell someone if you're going to a stranger's place, particularly also in the intersection of sex, which meth can help us or any stimulant can help us enjoy very much. Safe sex is an important piece of that conversation, of safest sex that you can have, particularly if you're going to use drugs at a party and you plan to have sex with other folks, right? So that is another piece in terms of conversation, right? Have a safe word, have a safe number, right? Have someone that you can call if you need to have them come pick you up or have them help you in that moment, because it can make you feel really out of sorts, right? And overramp, and can be really, really scary. And if we're in an environment that we don't know and we don't have a lot of control over, that can even magnify that sensation even more. So that's really important. Thank you for sharing that, Kevin. So in terms of what is a drug, a common definition of the word drug is any substance that in any small amount can produce significant changes in the body, the mind, or both, right? So we see cocaine, we see all these drugs, we know that it creates changes in our minds and our bodies and in both, right? And we know that they also mimic some of the natural brain chemistry that we have, some of the chemicals in our brains, such as dopamine or serotonin, right? It alters our mood, it helps with our anxiety, it makes us stay alert, it energizes us, it gives us a sense of pleasure, reward, right? All of those things. And so they look there and they heighten those sensations for us. And if we use drugs, what happens is our brain gets lazy and doesn't produce this as much as it used to do it before, because we're giving it to it. So it doesn't have to work to create it. And so that's when people stop using drugs. It's important to have a conversation about how it's going to feel without the drugs, but also the fact that maybe our brain may need some help in getting in balance again, right? In terms of being able to make or produce these chemicals. And it may not be able to do it in the way that it would have done it if we had not used drugs. That's another piece that is important to talk to folks. So drug use increases the dopamine release, and dopamine is that neurotransmitter that contributes to the feelings of pleasure. So no wonder we want to use them, because it feels really good. And who doesn't want to feel pleasure, right? We're wired to want to feel pleasure and not pain. And so important also to have a conversation around tolerance, right? Because substance use changes tolerance, and stopping the use also impacts tolerance. And so the more that we use, we can build tolerance. And then if we stop and resume again, we may be in a position where we may creating conditions of harm for self. So it's important to think about tolerance and the impact of tolerance on our participants. And then when we think of the effects of stimulants, these are some of the things that stimulants do. Oh, let me see, Natalie's sharing something in the chat box. For those who stop using the drugs, are they given any medication to help rebalance the neurotransmitter, or how's that done? Well, if people, I believe that, like that all has to do with the system that we're in terms of healthcare, right? And that's one of the keys is that then when we think about stigma and we think about barriers to access to treatment and the way that people that use drugs get treated, if you are not able to access behavioral mental health services that can help you address what it would look like if you stop using this substance and have that safety net there to help that person navigate that. That's why many folks find it really, really hard, because I may need to get some medications prescribed and work with someone to help me find that balance, right? Understanding that that it may never be possible, I think, to get to the place where we would have been without using the substances first, right? So I think it would be fantastic if folks had access to healthcare that it's humanizing, rehumanizing healthcare that really centers the person, and that really is invested in supporting people be the healthiest that they can be, right? So ideally, yes, we could give people those medications, right? And sadly, in my experience, folks have had such negative interactions with those systems that they are really wary of even connecting to those, or what it would be if they relapse, or what it would be if they picked up again, all of those things, right? So I think folks tend to stay away. But if other folks have other thoughts around this, I would love to hear. Yes, you're right, Nadia. Yeah, that and that's why I think it's important, and I'm so grateful that you're all here, because you are in a space where you are advocates for harm reduction, right? And you're able to have those conversations with folks around culturally what it would be for someone to use this substance that is completely accepted and recognized in our community, right? How is it that we talk about harm reduction to other providers, right? So that they're able to understand where we're coming from in terms of the paradigm that we use to engage people, right? In services and in work. Yes, to share your using drugs can decrease good pain management. Absolutely, Kevin, right? So it becomes a barrier, right? Instead of helping people navigate their pain. And that's a huge barrier that we've seen, particularly after the past 6 or 7 years, what's happened with substance use and with the drug supply. So in terms of the effects of stimulants, stimulants are uppers. So we will see that folks' pupils will be dilated, they become saucers. People will have increased energy, our heart rate increases and raises, such as our breathing also. Folks may grind their teeth. For some folks, they may experience depression, weight loss, and sexual arousal or impotence, depending on how much they use and how their body responds. And in terms of withdrawal symptoms around stimulants, folks have shared that they have experienced nausea, depression, a severe craving for the drugs, shaking, a desire to sleep, and loss of energy. So some of the withdrawal symptoms that folks have shared with us. And now we're going to talk about methamphetamine, meth, crank, ice, shards, all the different names around methamphetamine. So when we think about a stimulant-related overdose, is an overramping. And overramping is something similar to an opioid overdose. It means that we have used too much stimulants and our body is not reacting well to the amount that we have used. So this will look different for different folks, which is why it's harder to sometimes assess if someone is overramping versus knowing an opioid overdose. When you see it, you know it's an overdose, right? Here, a person will look extremely unsettled, anxious, and sweaty, but that can be me sometimes, without overramping, right? So it will be different for different participants. And it's important to be able to, when you know someone and you have this conversation, they can tell you, you know what, I'm not feeling good. This is not feeling well for me, right? There's no equivalent of naloxone to reverse this kind of stimulant-related overdose, we don't also have medication for that can help us, such as medications for opioid use disorder. We don't have something that we can support folks that are using stimulants in order to be able to taper off or not to use. And so that's also a challenge. Although there's stuff that is in the works around some of that. People are doing some works around finding ways to develop something or come up with something that can help with that. So these are some of the things that folks that have overramped told us that can help them. So if you have the option to have the person sit in a quiet space, people find it helpful. When I mean quiet, I mean somewhere that feels, lights are dim, there's not a lot of traffic or a lot of noise, right? That someone can just go, and that helps lower that intensity that people are experiencing. Dim those lights and make sure that we're keeping an eye on the person, monitoring their breathing. I have also asked folks to, some of them would want to use Legos. So I have stuff at hand that they can use with their hands, such as like Legos. Other folks like to use silly putty. Some people like to draw, something that they can call their attention to that can help them recenter and refocus, right? Some other folks I've worked with we used to have different essences, and we had different sort of music. And so they would like to listen to something that can help them calm down or bring them down. Other times it was just, I just want to sit in the corner and pack and unpack my bag 100 times, right? And that helped them come back a little bit, come back down from that experience of overramping. If folks have had this experience with participants and you have heard of other folks, things that other folks have done to help support someone overramping, you're welcome to share them in the chat box so other folks can learn from your expertise as well. So meth, it's a powder or a compressed powder that gives the appearance of a rock. It can be off-white or tan, or off-white with a red tint, and you smoke it in a bowl similar to that. And ice is clear rocks. They're yellowish rocks too. They're odorless and tasteless when they're smoked. And so here is a bag of methamphetamine ice. In terms of the effects, if you inhale it, you will feel them between 15 and 30 seconds from that first moment you inhaled. If you inject that, it will be between 10 and 20 seconds. If you swallow it, it will take you 30 minutes to feel the effects. And if you smoke it, about 5 to 10 seconds. And so the effects usually last between 4 to 12 hours. And the more that you consume, the more that the effects will last. So it will last longer when you consume larger quantities of meth. And then we have medications for ADHD. That someone brought up, and these are the most commonly prescribed medications in children and adolescents. We also know that about 5% of adults experience ADHD or live with ADHD and may have some of these medications prescribed. And it can help with folks staying focused, paying attention, and controlling behavior and impulses, right? So if you have been diagnosed with this, if you take these medications, it will counter that, right? It will help you stay focused, pay attention, and control behavior or control impulses. And so some of the most common brands in terms of ADHD drugs, there's Adderall, Vyvanse, and Ritalin, right? And as we see, Vyvanse and Adderall are pretty similar, and Ritalin is shorter acting than Adderall, right? But they do all the same. It's the same effects. And if we think about the difference between Adderall and crystal meth, there's really no difference. I think it's just one molecule that is different. So, and also prescription and racism and classism and all those other things, right? If I told you, oh, I just took this morning my Adderall so I could come and be focused and have, and be present here, no one would bat an eye. But if I told you I smoked a little bit of meth before showing up, some of you may be looking at me like, what? So it's important also to unpack some of these things, in terms of like what it means to have a prescription for Adderall versus, using meth. Insurance, yes, but not meth, absolutely. Yeah. And pharmaceutical companies make a lot of money out of that, right? Also. And then there's crack cocaine. And cocaine and crack, what is the difference between crack and cocaine? besides racism, as we mentioned in classism. What is the difference? What makes crack and cocaine different? Someone know? Powder versus rock, right? Yes. So cocaine is powder, and crack also it's less pure crack, right? And the way it tends to be consumed, absolutely pike too, and the cost, all of those things. But to get crack, you need baking powder, baking soda, I think, and I always forget which one of baking is. I should know that as I cook, and water, right? And you make a mix, and it's cheaper because you're using, you can make more. It's cut down, but also prison sentences are higher for folks using crack versus cocaine. So you can be found on the street with much larger quantities of cocaine, and your prison sentence would be significantly less than someone that is found with crack, with much more amounts of crack. Yes, thank you. That changed, Pike. A lot of work has gone into changing some of that. And, still there's that piece around, the societal perceptions, right, around who uses these drugs. And so when we think of cocaine and crack, again, as good stimulants do, they increase our alertness. They can give us a sense of agitation, loss of appetite. For some folks, they experience confusion, high blood pressure, increased heart rate, dilated pupils. Some folks may experience panic attacks and paranoia. We were talking about that also in terms of methamphetamine use. And some of the withdrawal symptoms are increased alertness, agitation, loss of appetite, confusion, very similar, right, to the effects that the person is experiencing when they are, using the drug. So it's very similar effects for withdrawal as they are for someone using. So that's why it's hard to assess sometimes if the person has not used or needs to use versus someone that has been using for a while. So here's powdered cocaine. Powdered cocaine, if you see it, it's white or of white color, it's flaky, it's water soluble, and it can be absorbed through your mouth, your mucous membranes, and your anus, right? Or your anywhere you have a membrane, it can be absorbed. Crack cocaine, different to powdered cocaine. It's a rock-like substance that it's like appears to be waxy, right? It's not water soluble, and it's smoked or broken down with an acid in order to inject it, right? So it also here, in terms of harm reduction messaging, if you're working with someone that injects their crack, what would be some of the things that we would want to maybe explore with them around safety or less harms in terms of their use, right? If I'm injecting it and I have to break it down with an acid, what would some of the things we could think about having conversations with folks about that would be? Yes, now we have to check for fentanyl, absolutely. I always say that we may need to think about fentanyl being everywhere in our drug supply at this point, right? So yes, you're right. So having a conversation about potentially cross-contamination, right? And what that would feel like for the person, and maybe having naloxone with them or having someone nearby that has naloxone. But in terms of smoking it, I would love to, injecting it is having a conversation about safer vein use, right? Yeah, like using new sterile equipment, how to, like the disinfection of the site, but also be mindful that, injecting crack or cocaine can impact your body differently. And so in terms of soft tissue infections, in terms of potential abscesses, in terms of all of that, it's important to have conversations with folks, and folks may know, right? We can learn tricks from participants how to use their injection the safest way. Breaking that with ascorbic acid and rotate the bendings and use a new syringe every time. Thank you, Loris. Absolutely. If we can avoid sharing equipment, we must avoid it. But if we can't, there's ways that we can work with folks around that too. Have experienced people inject, yes. So for some folks is to, say, maybe that can be helpful. And also, what would be some of the drawbacks of that, Kevin? Or if I'm having someone inject me, right? What would be some of the drawbacks in terms of that for folks?
Well, I've seen novice people trying to inject others, and it can really cause problems with the veins.
Yes.
Dulls the needle before you finish, and sometimes pushing too fast. So just some inexperience that causes harm for the person that's trying to get injected.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's really true. Missed shots can also be dangerous for folks. And I think also like learning how to inject, even if I had a friend who preferred, her and her partner use substances, and she really enjoyed it. It was part of their connection having him inject her, right? Like it was part of what they shared. And also she learned how to inject herself, because one of the things she told me is, if I'm no longer with him and I'm choosing to continue to use, I want to make sure that I have control over my injection, right? That I know what I need to do, because it could be potentially more dangerous for me not to know what to do, right? And Loris is sharing another conflict with having or relying on another person injecting is the power dynamics with partners. Absolutely, yeah. One partner, the partner that knows how to inject, can hold that over the other person, so it can make it harder for the person, if they have to leave their relationship, to leave it, or to feel safe in doing so. Or the person can control the person's substance use, can hold that too, so they can draw them into withdrawal. They can do many harms, right? So it's important also to have those conversations with folks around this. And if they're open to learning how to inject, and they're willing to consensually agree to that, for us to share that with them, because it's just power, right? I have the information, I know how to use it. And if I don't have to, then that's fine. But if I do, I have it back here. So I appreciate you all sharing that. That's a really important point, right? In terms of cocaine and crack, the onset of the effects, it's pretty quick. If you inhale it, it's about 2 seconds, less than 2 seconds. If you inject it, it's less than 30 seconds. If you smoke it, it's within that second. If you booty bump it, which is using it rectally or through the anus, is 1 to 2 minutes. And snorting cocaine will last about 60 minutes, the effects. Smoking crack will last between 5 to 15 minutes. People who inject cocaine are 3 times more, will inject 3 times more than folks that inject heroin, because the high will last much shorter than the period of time. So that's why also having that conversation about how to best support someone that is injecting cocaine or crack to be able to have really good vein care is vital, because they're going to have to constantly access their veins to inject, right? And so it's so important to have that conversation so that they can have the healthiest veins available to do that. Yes, absolutely, Kevin. The duration of the effects, right? One versus the other, it's an element that can influence choice, right? Particularly, and choice and economics, right? As well, which is part of that choice. That's a really good point. Thank you for that. Which is what is happening with fentanyl and with heroin in some ways too, right? You can purchase fentanyl that, if you are aware that you're making that conscious choice. I want to use fentanyl because I know that I can purchase more. It's cheaper, it's purer. So it's like a little bit gives me a strong sensation, right? And I can control that, and it's better for my pocket. Many folks are making that choice, right? But they're making an informed choice around what they want to do, which is different than me using a substance not knowing what it is or what it has. And so now we are going to go into a breakout group activity. I will share this with you in the chat box, and I will share my screen. So if you bear with me, I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can copy these and so that you can have it. This activity. So what I want you all to do when you go into your groups is, first, please turn on your cameras and your microphones so that your colleagues can see and hear you. And what I want to do is have folks have a conversation. You're going to have about 10 minutes for this. I will give you a 2-minute warning before we bring you back into the large group. I want you to chat with your peers about, the following questions. How does your program provide resources surrounding stimulant use? What could be some harm reduction or risk reduction practices for people who use stimulants? What would be some of those practices or recommendations that you can share with folks or that you know? And what supplies would be helpful to offer people who use stimulants? So what are the supplies that people need or would be helpful for them to have? what would be some of the harm reduction or risk reduction practices that you could share with people that use stimulants, and how does your program provide resources surrounding stimulant use? And so we're going to have 10 minutes, and I think Alberto is going to put you in your breakout groups, right, Alberto?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
I am.
Welcome, welcome. Hello, hello. Welcome back.
Everybody should be back.
Bienvenidos. Welcome, everybody. So I would love to hear what you all discussed in your breakout groups. And after we share with each other the things that you all discussed, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to the second part of the training, which has to do with risk reduction and harm reduction strategies. So I would love to hear from folks, and you can use your microphone if you feel comfortable, and or you can type in the chat box. What were some of the things that you all talked about in your small groups?
I have that nasty dislike of silence, so I'll speak. One of the things that I was struck in our group is several people were sharing about the need to respond to substance use because of the syphilis epidemic and congenital syphilis. So trying to reach women, we need to address the meth use or substance use. So that whole appreciation of the overlap between substance use and syphilis, congenital syphilis.
Absolutely. So really having conversations with folks around, pregnant folks that, can get pregnant, around, what are some of the harms, that can come from substance use, and how we can best address it, right? And particularly if you have folks that are working, separate groups of folks working with the person, it is helpful because you build relationships, right? So you don't have to silo, you don't have to work in silos, you can work together as a collective, and that's super helpful, right? To be able to have those conversations with folks in a way that is destigmatizing, right? And not shaming people. Absolutely. And I see that Loris is sharing statewide male-based harm reduction programs, sharing this information far and wide, especially in areas with no syringe service programs or harm reduction services. Thank you, Loris. That's the address for next distro, which does mail-based access to services, access to equipment for folks to use drugs, as well as naloxone for those folks that are needed. So it's next distro, and they have a web page you can check.
Thank you
did you
for
talk
sharing
about?
that. Thanks, Tanagra.
Yeah. What else? Thank you for sharing it. What would be some of the supplies that you would think would be helpful to offer folks if you want to engage them in harm reduction practices around stimulants? What would be some of the supplies you think would be helpful to offer folks?
I know that our SSP in Santa Rosa just recently started offering like pipes. They call them something else, but
Yes.
they said that they are flying off the shelves. People are using them so they can come back once a week, I think it is, to get new ones. So, and people are taking them up on it. And what they said was that it actually opened up the different communities that they're seeing more Black and brown people come in and using for the pipe use. So I thought that was really interesting too.
Yeah, no, that's great, right? So providing folks access to smoking equipment that is sterile, and they are able to have it when they need it, super important. So that's great. Clean or new sterile syringes in case folks are injecting their stimulants. That's also super important. Thank you, Nadia, and thank you, Miranda, for sharing that. What else? What would be other supplies that you think would be helpful for folks that use stimulants?
Hey, this is Loris. I promise this is the last thing that I will say because I am so
No,
enjoying it.
I want to hear your
And
voice all day, Loris.
And I feel like
Not
I'm
the
taking up
last.
so much space. Oh my gosh. So I just wanted to share this bit of information. The last person who spoke, thank you so much for sharing about the program in your county distributing glass. What we're seeing, like statewide, just in terms of programs who are receiving the California Harm Reduction Initiative funding, the Cheery funding, like we asked them just about trends and things that they're seeing in their communities with their participants. And there's this steady trend of the number of people who smoke or snort seeking services at syringe service programs. So I just want to like state that, like, you think of like just the progression of harm reduction, the fact that, we're kind of slow in California, not gonna lie, but there's like, like this trend, like our participants, the people we serve are demonstrating to us that we definitely have to start expanding beyond a syringe and start thinking about like not injection supplies. So I just want to share that, and I will mute myself. Thanks.
I appreciate that so much, Doris. And I think that's why I want, like, for me, it's about harm reduction services, right? And within that, because if we think the syringe access, if I'm someone who smokes my drugs, I may not feel that that's a place where I can get those resources, even if I do offer them, right? So it's really important to make that really explicit, Loris, as you're saying, and make it really well known to folks that these supplies are available. And also it's a good conversation to have with people that use injection drugs, right? Also, you may have these other avenues in place that you want to change the route of that you administer your drugs, right? Because it's also about harm reduction in that sense too for some folks. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And so in terms of risk reduction practices and harm reduction practices that we can share with folks that use stimulants, as we said, is having conversations with people about different modalities or routes of administration that folks can have, and providing those tools to people, right? Making sure that we have them available for everybody, and that we engage people in conversation about those and how they can best approach them, because that is a way also to destigmatize the experience for people and to learn more about what it is that people want and need. So we're centering the services based on the experiences and needs of participants, and that's really important, right? Because that means that we're telling them we're seeing you and we want you here and we welcome you. Absolutely, Nadia, offering trauma-informed care, conversations around, how do we offer our services, and we make low threshold, low barrier services, right? That everybody's welcome here in this space, and that we're doing that from a trauma-informed lens is absolutely really helpful too. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we're going to come back at 11:26, and then we'll walk towards the last part of our training, which is risk reduction and harm reduction practices. And then we'll have some polls, and then you'll be going on with your day. So I'll see you in 10 minutes. Have a good break, everybody. Welcome, everybody. I hope you had a moment of pause and were able to take care of yourself. And now we are going into the second part of the training, which has to do with risk reduction strategies. And so when we're thinking of risk reduction strategies for folks that smoke their stimulants, it's thinking of glass pipes and some of the risks that can come from smoking is that, it can create lung and throat damage, our normal heart rhythms and high blood pressure for folks. Also, it can create dryness around the mouth or in the lips. And so it can result in cut lips, which increases susceptibility to HIV, hepatitis C, herpes, and TB, right? So these are some of the risks. And when we're talking to folks about safer crystal meth smoking, make sure that we share with folks some of this messaging. Make sure that we clean our hands and the pipe with alcohol pads, putting our crystal meth pipe into the pipe, putting the drug into the pipe, and then tap the pipe until the drugs have moved down into the bowl, and then apply heat to the bowl and keep it moving the heat source around. So you're moving the heat source around, and then inhale slowly and exhale immediately. Do not hold in the crystal meth smoke, and then inhale it as soon as you inhale it slowly, and then exhale it immediately, and then clean your pipe and burn off the residue and clean it with alcohol pads. So really have good maintenance of your pipe as well, so that you're not smoking that residue. And so here you clean your hands and pipe with alcohol swabs, and then you pour your crystal into your pipe, and then you tap your pipe to move the drugs into the bowl, which is the little, you can't see my finger. I feel like I should have one of those red things. Maybe this thing has it, but I don't know how to use it. But you see the bowl is the round sort of end piece of the pipe, and then holding your pipe halfway down the stem so that you avoid also burning your fingers. Let me see if I can put the captions here too. You apply heat to the bowl, keeping the heat source moving. And then the heat will vaporize the drugs and it will fill your pipe with smoke. And then you inhale slowly and exhale immediately. And so that's those are tips, safer meth use tips. If you are smoking crack, some of the safer crack smoking tips you can offer is for folks to use their own glass pipe and their own rubber mouthpiece, which is that sort of orangey like spark plug cover. Folks use that as a way to protect their lips from getting burned. Also, if I have my own spark plug cover, then maybe we can share the pipe because my lips are not touching the glass. Use short boy or a pipe screen and a wooden pusher to push the drugs down, and then move the flame along the stem. This is different than when you're using meth because you don't have a bowl here, so you're moving it along the stem, and then let the pipe cool between hits and make sure that we're keeping the airflow in the room. So make sure that you clean everything using, again, alcohol swabs are your best friend to clean your hands or your smoking equipment so that you can prevent bacterial germs getting into your body. And then burn the short boy before using. Burning it before using can remove chemicals that are harmful to our health and that may add that metallic taste to our hits. So use a lighter, touch the tip of the flame to the short boy for a few seconds to remove any chemicals. Do not hold the short boy in your hand because it gets hot and can burn you. Place it on a table or grip it using pliers, matches, or anything else you have available. And then you insert the short boy using a wooden pusher. You insert that little ball of short boy into the stem. The short boy will need to be small distance from the end, so there's space to put the crack at the end of the stem, and you will inhale from the other side. Push the short boy in from both sides till you're sure it can that it is tight. It's a tight fit, so it's not gonna get sucked when you smoke. You can bow to the stern to test it before you put your drugs in, and then you attach your rubber mouthpiece or your spark plug cover. That's a mouthful, and then you put it at the opposite end of the short boy. And then you use clean ash on your short boy. You're putting clean ash into the smoking side of your pipe before you put in the drugs. The ash will help make the sugar boy last longer, and it will also help to keep the drugs from getting sucked through. You can get ash, a cigarette or a joint into the stem, or burn some paper to clean ash. So you can either use a cigarette or a joint, or you can just burn paper and you'll get the clean ash, which is what you want. And then you move the flame along the stem. So moving the flame along the stem spreads out the heat, and it prevents the stem from cracking or burning your lips. And then we recommend putting the pipe down between hits, because you want to make sure that you're enjoying your high, that you let that hit take effect before you smoke more. Spacing out our hits, this is another harm reduction tool, will make the drugs last longer, and it will also keep the pipe from overheating. So it's a way also to engage in harm reduction practices. And then there's booty bumping. And in terms of booty bumping, some of the risks that can come from it is damage to the mucous membranes that line the rectum. And there's a risk for abrasions in the rectum when it goes up. So it may increase risks for HIV or STIs if you're having inserted sex without a condom, or if you are and using drugs as well. So for safer booty bumping, we want to make sure that we're using a turkey baster, or we're removing the needle from the syringe. You take out the bevel. You make sure that you clean both internal, external, and anal sphincters. We use clean water to dissolve the drugs. We recommend not sharing booty bumping syringes for many reasons. And we can also insert a pill or powered drugs through the rectum using booty bumping, and use an enema beforehand to make sure that you're cleaning and clearing both internal and external sphincters. So here's the rectum. And so for safer booty bumping, we want to fill a 1 millimeter syringe with the drug solution. We want to add a small amount of lube to the end of the syringe. And while we're standing up, we start to insert slowly, approximately half the length of that syringe. And once we do that, we're going to press that plunger down slowly, and then we'll remove the syringe. And it is really important that we are relaxed so that we don't experience any leakage. We can also use fentanyl test strips to assess whether or not our supply may have been in contact with fentanyl, or may have had some cross-contamination of fentanyl. And so many organizations are now offering fentanyl test strips to participants. People that use drugs repurpose these that are used for urine to detect fentanyl in their drug supply. So these are not created to specifically detect fentanyl in the drug supply per se, but they have been repurposed by folks that use drugs because they want to keep each other safe in their community, to make sure that they can use them to test, but they're used for urine testing. They can be purchased from Dance Safe individually or for BTNX in bulk, and it is about $1 a strip if you buy them in bulk, and they are available at some harm reduction programs as well as online. And so 1 line, it means that it's positive for fentanyl. 2 lines, it means that it's negative for fentanyl. And so when you're using fentanyl test strips for cocaine, you are going to follow these instructions. You add sterile water to your empty baggie, or the cooker you just prepped. You want to make sure you're mixing well. And before you do this, you're going to load your shot first. You're only going to test the rinse water. Then you're going to dip the test strip in that rinse water up to the first line, and you're going to hold that there for 15 seconds. And then after you do that, you're going to place that test strip on a sterile surface or across the top of the cooker, as you see on the screen. 1 line means it's positive, 2 lines means it's negative. This is for cocaine, and if you're using heroin, you can do this as well. For meth, it's different. So because the composition of MDMA or methamphetamine can trigger inaccurate results if the drug is not watered down, we recommend you do this. You just half a cup of water, and then you dilute it in a cup. And then you don't test full shards of pieces of shards, right? You test the drug residue instead, whatever is left in the baggie. And then you do the same thing. You dip it in 15 seconds, you take it out, and you place it somewhere sterile and you wait for it to show. One line is positive, 2 lines means it's negative. And all of these, there's tons of information around this that we, National Harm Reduction Coalition, can offer. And I know folks throughout California also. Yes, it is. I always say, thank you, Pike. Do you have you heard from folks if they're using different methods to test their meth or MDMA that you would like to share with folks?
I'll just say that like there's been a lot of back and forth amongst harm reductionists about the actual amount. Some people now are saying that this is too diluted, and then if you make it less, it's just really complicated. So what we tell people is don't rely on the test strips if you're testing meth or MDMA.
Yeah.
Use all the other harm reduction stuff, which I'll turn over to you because it's your presentation, but there's lots of, we don't actually even recommend the fentanyl test strips for meth or Molly.
Yeah, I think if anything, they're a good conversation starter with people around harm reduction practices, right? It's a good way to destigmatize substance use and to engage people in conversation around that. Also with the caveat that because these are not created specifically designed to test drugs directly, that they're meant to test urine, like to test drugs in presence of drugs in urine, that's different. And I appreciate you sharing that. And it's really important. Also, one thing that I appreciate you bringing this up is that it gives us opportunity to be fully transparent with participants too, right? Like the important thing for me here is to uplift that if people want to test their drugs, it means to me that they care about themselves, their health, the health of their community, and the health of their people. And we want to name that and uplift it because because the one thing that we hear all the time that society at large tells us about people that use drugs is that they're irresponsible and that they don't care, that they're selfish. And this is the contrary. People care and they're not selfish. They're very giving and want to be able to protect and help each other. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so in terms of harm reduction services, we have a broad spectrum of services. And as I mentioned, harm reduction services provide safer drug use supplies, but they do so much more than that. Our programs are able to support people in so many different ways, whether because they do it internally and they have the services available internally, or because they partner with other organizations externally to help them create a holistic care space for people. So we provide syringe access and disposal, and this is something that members in the community use that may not necessarily be using drugs themselves. We've had folks that are diabetic or that need to use syringes to administer medication to themselves and to others to bring those for safe disposal. We provide safer drug use supplies, and that includes not only syringes and the equipment to use drugs intravenously, but also to smoke and to snort their drugs. We provide overdose prevention, education, and we also provide naloxone as a medication that can help revert an overdose. We provide safer sex materials for people, including condoms, lubes, dental dams, all those things. We provide either on-site medication for opioid use disorder or referrals to those services as well. Harm reduction services also offer drop-in centers for people, and this is a community space where people in the community, whether they use drugs or not, can come in and either use technology, use a phone, use the computer, get referrals, get connected, have coffee, have some food, be in a group, watch a movie, just find community and connection. Drop-in center spaces are a beautiful community hub for everybody who's part of that community. We also offer housing first services, or we connect people to those through referrals. And in many parts of the world, we have safer consumption services that are legally and above ground. In this country, we've had safer consumption services underground for many years. Safer consumption services is a space that is usually ran or staffed by people who use drugs that have lived experience to support other people that use drugs, be able to do it in a way that is safe, where they have access to naloxone and to other overdose prevention resources, as well as for folks that smoke drugs or snort their drugs and use stimulants. They also are able to use safe consumption services. Safe consumption services also are one space that gets to connect people to other harm reduction services and to other community services. We don't have one. I don't think we're yet. We have one in this country. Hopefully we'll get one soon, because they save lives. And they save lives, and they're just important spaces to help destigmatize the experience of people that use drugs. So I know we have some polls, Alberto. If this is what I have, I don't know if folks have questions or comments. I would love to hear if you do. You can ask them using your microphone, or you can do so via chat if you feel more comfortable. And then we have some polls for you.
This is Kevin. I'm thinking medication for meth disorder is also needed.
Yes.
There are some formulas being tried, and I think that we need better research and permission to use those medications to treat, reimbursed by insurance.
Absolutely. You're so right. I think that there's a lot of, we're lacking in that department, right? Still, like we need to make some strides, right? To be able to offer those to folks if they make it available, right? For folks. Thank you for bringing that up. I think that's really necessary. Any other comments or questions?
I also think, this is Melissa from Los Angeles County, we also need to get into contingency management, and they never want us to give any type of like incentive, with our grants. So we really need to get better at having money for contingency management. I also had a question that's been burning in my brain, and I hope it's not inappropriate, but it's just something that I'm very worried about, both as a parent and as just seeing things coming down the pipe. Do you think the increase in ADHD medication is possibly priming people to, become addicted to meth? And I know that maybe that's an inappropriate question, and I'm sorry if I'm, not following the method, but it's just something that every day I'm scared to death of.
No, I don't think it's inappropriate. I appreciate you asking it. And, I think that I would love to hear what other folks think in regards to that. Because you're not I mean, it's a conversation that I've heard other folks have and questions asked. So if other folks have thoughts around the question that Melissa's asking, please, this is a space where I would love to hear what other folks think.
Do you mind repeating the question, please?
Melissa go ahead, Melissa.
The question is, all of the prescribing of ADHD and all the diagnosing of ADHD and the prescribing of Adderall medication for people with this, is it priming the pump for them when their prescription goes away, or when they're no longer to take care of the doctor, for them to be self-medicating with meth? The same way people had, the opioids that were prescribed by the doctors, and then those went away, so then they went to heroin.
I have no opinion, but that's interesting.
I think anytime they're going to prescribe ADHD meds, especially to children, we really need good monitoring with a plan to see an exit strategy. It shouldn't be assumed that they're going to be on it for life. And with that monitoring and sense of it's a temporary treatment, I think you're less likely to have people become addicted or want more stimulant.
Yeah, I think we don't have, I'm not sure we have enough research, right, to sort of explore that further, but I do think that if we think about this system, right, and how capitalism operates, it needs to have folks consume, right, in order to exist. Consumption, you want to create consumption, and you want to make sure that you're hooking consumers from very early on. And so I think part of what Kevin is saying is thinking about harm reduction practices and thinking about how do we approach the person, right? So we don't shame or we penalize someone that actually would benefit from having access to ADHD medications, but also what are the other things that we can do to support that person if they would like to transition out of the use of that, right? And I think that that piece is really important, because with any medication, right, we don't see that very frequently. The ability for folks to say, you know what, like this is really helpful. Like, for example, I was very depressed and was experiencing severe dysthymia for a long time, and I went and asked for medication. And I also told my psychiatrist that I wanted to make sure that I needed to use it to get me out of where I was at, and that I wanted help in making sure that I was able to transition out when I was ready, right? And so that was helpful to me. And I worked with someone, I was really lucky to work with someone that was willing to do that for me and with me and support me in that process, right? And so I think that if we had the ability to work with folks like that, it can be really, really helpful for people to be able to engage in these conversations on what is that they need and want from the medication, and what do they see as the benefits and the harms. And I see that Pike is saying that it's a really interesting consideration. Ironically, if someone has been self-medicating with stimulants in the street, it can be really hard for them to get the HDH meds prescribed, which is problematic, even if they really do have ADHD, which is similar to what we're seeing with opioids, right? That folks that are in pain and need pain medication are not being denied access to medication. This is when we have prohibition. It causes a lot of harm. Linda, you wanted to share something? I don't know if you wanted to.
I'm agreeing with that, because I think that even pain medications now, they're not getting prescribed when really needed, whether someone has a history of substance use or not. So
Yes.
the conversation in the chat's very fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think prohibition can be really, really dangerous. And what we want to do is we want to make sure we minimize harms for people, and that we really trust that if people are in pain, that they should get their medication. If people experience and live with ADHD, that they're able to also get that medication in a way that is safe and secure for them. And that if they want to have a plan to transition out of using that medication, that we can establish that for folks too. I think it's a really good question, Melissa, that I think would benefit from further discussion and hopefully some more research.
Yeah, that was.
And thanks to Nagar for these honest conversations and direct conversations. I think people appreciate, I know I appreciate that, and I do appreciate